Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests. In this talk, I aim to accomplish the following. My goal is this is part one of a four-part lecture series. This is Fundamentals of Trust Operation, Foundation and Principles. Number 2 is Fundamentals of Trust Operation, Personnel. Number 3 is Fundamentals of Trust Operation, Procedures. And the final presentation is Fundamentals of Trust Operation, Resources of Trust Corpus. After the obligatory disclaimer, please wait for that, I will give you the following. I will give you prepared remarks. I will give you then questions and answers as time permits, as determined by our Toastmaster. And then I'll have a brief wrap-up. Please note that I'm a paralegal, not an attorney. I'm not a member of any bar I cannot belly up to. Nothing in any presentation, either this one or the other three, or any position of a similar vein or nature, is considered legal, tax, or financial advice, and everything in this presentation or a similar vein is considered legal and financial education. With that disclaimer, I have 3 internal goals. The first is I'm going to provide you resources that you can use in your estate planning. The second is I'm going to provide you references. If I cite someone, and if you're paying attention, you know I'm going to be citing. It was given an introduction. I will give you a teaser. I'm going to give you references, resources, and sites, and also gems. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 gems you can use in your estate planning. Trusts are everywhere by way of introduction. A last will and testament will eventually produce a testamentary trust. Social Security is a trust fund. The gas tax fund is a trust fund. Most of the Las Vegas hotels were at one time built by the Western Teamsters Pension Fund, trust fund. There's also trusts for the Rockefeller dog. If you're interested, it's a humorous anecdote. I'll be happy to answer that when the questions. It's the famous little anecdote in trusts, the Rockefeller dog. Be sure to ask him that one. To make sure you're in the right seminar, let's look at a gem from our website, from our book, The Art of Passing the Buck, Volume 1, Green for Growth. It's a basic book. Volume 2, Not for Everyone, The Serious Student and the Professional, Trust, Blueprints, blue cover. I'll describe these books in further detail later on in the presentation. On the website, www.passingbucks.com, which is on your handout, in large letters, www.passingbucks.com, the book, The Art of Passing the Buck. From about 5 years ago, Yule 2012, is a presentation by Gwen Wyckoff right down at Diners Restaurant on the Westchester Culver City border. Every third Monday, the Carl Hess Company is there. It's been since 1995. Diners beer since 1959. Wonderful for their fried chicken and their fried foods. Do consider them when you're in the mood for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Gwen Wyckoff, the Senior Trust Administrator, gives a talk in which she discusses how, used properly, one of the secrets of trust planning, the irrevocable common law trust, which is a secret of North America's and beyond's wealthiest families, is if a fairy, a good fairy, because only good fairies are allowed in our presentations, has waved her magic wand over yourself and your family and given you the gift of what? Perpetual wealth, perpetual prosperity. If you're looking for perpetual poverty, this is not the proper lecture. However, stick around, you might find you like perpetual prosperity better. Therefore, the fundamentals of trust is the reason to pass on or even increase wealth over time. There are 2 types of trust identified towards the end of my prepared remarks that are known for increasing wealth over time. However, note, if you study historians Will and Ariel Durant, for most of human history, human beings that lived in abject poverty. Most civilizations, except for ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and modern civilization, the average person was a hunter-gatherer or a farmer, 96 to 98% of the population, and they lived on approximately $3 a day. You do not get ahead on $3 a day. It's only in those, according to Durant's, there have been 3 civilizations which you might expect to give a better life to your children. And only 3 of those, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and post-Enlightenment, post-Industrial Revolution civilization, where you might expect a better life in your own lifetime. It appears that there are people seeking to give you more of a subsistence level. This was a quote, and I'll give you the reference, I'll give you the teaser first, that was done in human history. I will delineate it. It was done by a gentleman, it was done in North America, it was done in the 20th century. Open quote. People are kidding themselves. They don't have the buying power they used to have. A lot of the people living today don't know what the buying power of success was before we decided to use excessive income taxes to punish success and estate and gift taxes to force every generation to start from scratch, close quote. Who do you think says that? Right? Any guesses? I'm going to give you the name and the site. That was said by the man who you heard the name in the introduction, T. Coleman Andrews. He was commissioner of the IRS during the first term of Dwight David Eisenhower between 1953 and 1955. That quote is contained in this book, The Art of Passing Buck, Volume 2. And I'll give you the reference. I said it in the site, and I quoted somewhere. That was done in the magazine U.S. News and World Report in 1956. I have not seen the original art. I've seen a photocopy discussing the income tax. It could not have been bolder. I'm going to quote that again. I trust this is upsetting to you to hear this. There's no conspiracy theory. I have the actual fact. Open quote. People are kidding themselves. They don't have the buying power they used to have. A lot of the people living today don't know what the buying power of success was before we decided to use excessive income taxes to punish success and estate and gift taxes to force every generation to start from scratch, close quote. I will entertain questions in the question and answer session. Who we is? He didn't say I. He said we. I wonder who we is. Again, there's 21 civilizations if you're excluding the legendary Atlantis and New. There's actually some suggestion now that Atlantis may have been in Antarctica. Fascinating little concept. Now that we've established you're looking for a reason to at least preserve or increase your wealth, I'm going to give you the interest of time. Only 3 families in North America have done this. There have been many families that have used a particular technique, usually the irrevocable common law trust, they use other sophisticated estate planning techniques. Here are 3 families. The first is a family name you've all heard of, the Rockefellers, the Standard Oil Trust. When they broke up the Standard Oil, they actually caused the Rockefellers to get more money. That's John D. Rockefeller Sr. The descendants of 2 of those trusts, ExxonMobil, is one of the world's largest companies. If they write you a check for anything smaller than the national debt of a small country, it's probably good. And you had Nelson Rockefeller was actually vice president of the United States. He was one heartbeat away from being the president. He was also a presidential contender in 1964. That was the 3-way race with another fellow. Barry Goldwater won the nomination, was slaughtered by Lyndon Johnson. general election. The other contender was a fellow named George Romney. George Romney is Mitt Romney, or was Mitt Romney's father. He's deceased. George Romney, before he was governor of Michigan, was the president of a company called American Motors. In those days, it was the big four automakers in the United States and Canada. Only one part of American Motors survives, Jeep, now part of Fiat Chrysler. When George Romney was going to run for governor of Michigan, he put his assets into what's called a blind trust. It's a special type of trust where very little information goes to the beneficiary. He served 2 terms as governor of Michigan, and he served 2 terms as the HUD secretary under Richard Nixon. He was the governor, as I noted, of Michigan. His son, Mitt Romney, was governor of Massachusetts, and coincidentally, since the Winter Olympics are starting tonight, he was, actually his last night in Korea. Tonight for sure. Thank you for coming out. He was the head of the very successful 2002 Winter Olympic Games in Salt Lake City. Mitt Romney was the head of the organizing committee. And now he's the head of Bain Capital. And he might run for senator if you don't. Who knows? That's the second example. Number 3. And these people are known to abuse the irrevocable common law trust. The sons of H.L. Hunt, the Texas oil man. Supposedly he paid $50,000 for an irrevocable common law trust template about 40 years ago, and he's cookie-cuttered that across his family. Let me talk about one of the sons. There were 3 sons who actually came to court in the silver bargain in 1979 as given by the book The Silver Bears. Lamar Hunt. Is that name familiar? Does anybody remember that trophy they gave it out when the Patriots won the AFC Championship? Lamar Hunt, again, Texas oil person. Lamar Hunt was responsible for 3 things. He started a football team called the Dallas Texans. They moved to Kansas City in the mid-1960s to one of the slickest forms of estate planning you've ever heard. If you want me to ask about it, I can tell you about that one involved in the municipal bonds that were used to build Arrowhead Stadium. Second thing Lamar Hunt's responsible for is Major League Soccer. He is the one that started the move to Major League Soccer in the 1960s. And the third thing he's responsible for, he was one of the co-founders of World Team Tennis. Late Lamar Hunt, one of the 3 Hunt brothers. Again, using the irrevocable common law trust. Now let's talk about the use of trust for estate planning. Because as I said earlier, trusts are used for other purposes. There's about 18 different types of trusts in common use. Here's your second gem. Again, the first gem was the ferry. Your second gem is a trust is renewable. A properly structured, irrevocable common law trust is renewable. Depending on how you feel about the rule concerning perpetuities, you renew it every 20 years or every 25 years. I started off, actually it was my second role in the trust world. I worked between 1991 and 1996 with what were called Massachusetts Business Trust, what were called Free Market Contractor Company, where the bookkeeping was actually done in grams of gold. And in their trust indenture, trust agreement, trust contract, they all were 25 years renewable. Again, depends on how you feel about the rule concerning perpetuity, which I'll cover in a little bit more depth later on in this presentation when I talk about specific trust used for estate planning. Again, there's your second gem. The contract is renewable, therefore the trust can continue indefinitely simply by renewing it, renewing it. As probably the Rockefellers and the Hunts and the Romneys do every 25 years. Have a board of trustees meeting and they renew it. Again, how do you find out about the world of trust and estate planning? You go to our website, www.passingducks.com. And you might consider purchasing one or both of our books. Here are my desk copies. You can see they are well used. I refer to these nearly every day. This is The Art of Passing the Buck, Volume 1. It's for everybody. It's $49.95 plus tax plus shipping. We accept Stripe, which lets you get PayPal, which lets you get Bitcoin and PayPal. And yes, I'll even take your advice, which I'm not worried about. However, since you're my Toastmaster friends, if you use this discount code, 10 Volume 1, you get $10 off. So it'll be $39.95 plus tax plus shipping. If you want an EPUB, this one is available as an EPUB from Lulu, lulu.com. As you can see, it's a high-quality trade paperback. It's written about the 8th, 9th, 10th grade level. It's chock full of footnotes, etc. Basics of estate planning, which you might have got a little bit in your personal finance class. Then we suggest you consider normally the newsletter. The newsletter comes out 6 times a year, is $50 a year for the half year, and then $80 gets you the full year of 6 issues. I contribute the occasional article. My latest article was about how $300,000 to $400,000 of blue chip stocks disappeared out the back door of the fellow's estate plan. Whoosh! Gone. And now the family is destitute. This guy worked his whole life, picked blue chip stocks, and then through malfeasance and emptiness, gone. Tragedy. Then we suggest, if you're a serious student in the professional, trust blueprints, this one. Art of Passing the Buck, Volume 2. Let me establish its value before we continue. This information is not readily available. This helps you put together most of the things to put together your trust, your local common law trust. Your alternative to this is be a consultation with a high-priced and high-powered East Coast law firm in Toronto or New York. And you're going to pay them, the attorney, the paralegal will pay $100 to $125 an hour. At that level, you're going to pay the attorney $500 to $600 an hour. This one is $575 plus tax plus shipping. However, since you are my dear friends, the biggest discount we ever offer, $60 for Volume 2 if you already have a Volume 1. Or if you want the whole enchilada, $60 for both. And those codes are good for the next 14 days. You may give them to your friends, neighbors, whatever. Again, this is your basic book. This talks about the basics of estate planning. You're probably not going to get anywhere else. We also have an Amazon affiliate program. We have carefully curated books about estate planning. I'll mention 3. We'd ask if you're going to buy something from Amazon, you link through us, we'll get a small spiff, and you'll get our thanks. We have 2 books by an attorney named Hughes. They do not talk about trust structure at all. They talk about long-term strategic planning. How to manage your trust 20, 30, and 40 years in order that you may provide for yourself and your children and grandchildren, because the real assets of the trust are the beneficiaries. Let me give you a quick example. The Kennedy family. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. established a series of trusts for all his children. Business trust, he had a management trust. If you remember, son number 1, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. was killed in a naval accident during World War II called Project Aphrodite. I actually read the book. I can tell you all about that. Interesting book. Early radio-controlled aircraft and television, early use of television during the mid-1940s. The second one, Jack, Senator from Massachusetts, President of the United States, had an unfortunate encounter with some bullets in Dallas, Texas. The third, Robert, Bobby, Attorney General of the United States, Senator from Massachusetts, and 50 years ago, I think he would have beaten Richard Nixon in the general election. Unfortunately, he runs the bullets at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Teddy, the youngest, was for many years a senator from Massachusetts, and he was twice a presidential contender. I would say that Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. did fairly well for a fellow that started out as a rum runner and a bootlegger in the 1920s. You can look that up. This is not, I'm not disparaging the man, that's what he did. He made his money smuggling liquor in from Canada. As did a lot of other folks. That was the era of the speakeasy, which was a whole talk in itself. Then we have another book I'm going to recommend, The Rich and the Super Rich by Ferdinand Lundberg. Again, through the Amazon affiliate program. That's a hardcover book written approximately 50 years ago, talking about how the truly wealthy do either handle their wealth and how they manage their money. You think you might be able to learn something from that? How the Rockefellers manage their money, how they accumulate over time? Yeah. Again, Ferdinand Lundberg, The Rich and the Super Rich. The question is often asked, how important is studying court cases? And the answer is, it's a great start. A well-run trust is seldom in court. You can learn something from a badly run trust. A well-run trust will appear in court as speaking as a paralegal, not an attorney, under the following circumstances. There's some minor ministerial action required under either the probate or the civil code. It shows up, the judge rubber stamps it, blip, on the radar of the service screen. That's it. Maybe 5 years later, go, blip, and that's the end of it. If a trust, again, speaking as a paralegal, not an attorney, if a trust is constantly in court, it is somehow being mismanaged. Simple. That's a fact. How do you get the information? Go to our website, www.bassandbucks.com. You look at the audios, the videos, the court cases, the older newsletter articles, a few research papers, all available at no charge to you to help you understand the fundamentals of estate planning. The books and the newsletter will get you another 30%. Get you 50%. To get you the other 80%, we have a qualified trust administrator that provides consultation on both the books, The Art of Passing the Buck, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and to get that last 20% to help you put together your local common law trust. There's another trust that actually provides consulting on that. Moving on to the penultimate section. Let's take a look at trust used for estate planning. I'll start off with the basic. Last will and testament becomes a testamentary trust upon the demise of the person that made it. Simple. And there are four we will discuss in some detail. The first is a living trust. I'm using this as a baseline because many of you are familiar with a living trust. That is irrevocable on the death of the settlor or grantor or creator. These are all synonyms for the same person or persons. Because several people can actually be treated to trusts. That does happen. It is used to, speaking as a paralegal, not an attorney, it's used to dissipate wealth. It is not normally used to either maintain or increase wealth over time. It's used to provide an effective dissipation of wealth. And what happens is, it lets you bypass or avoid probate. Very simple. It's good in that way. The second is the revocable trust. I am told by people in the field that the current President of the United States, El Jefe Donald Trump, has revocable trust because he trusts no one. I have been told that. I do not know if that's true. I have been told that. The revocable trust, again speaking as a paralegal, not attorney, has a special use in California, relating to Proposition 13. If you put a piece of property, a piece of real estate that you own, in one of your revocable trusts for 11 years, or 11 months, 11 years, 11 months, or less, It typically does not trigger a reassessment under Proposition 13 and all the other initiatives, statutes, court cases, etc., regulations related to that. That's a whole topic in itself, which I will not propose to entertain this evening in the interest of time. Finally, or penultimately within this section, we have the statutory irrevocable trust. I have learned a great deal about this in recent months from our senior trust administrator, Glenn Wyckoff, and I've discovered the following. If you have great staff and savvy trustees, an irrevocable statutory trust will not only preserve wealth, it will increase wealth over time. However, I mentioned I would talk about this, it's necessary to be mindful about the rule concerning perpetuities. The rule concerning perpetuity basically states, and speaking as a paralegal non-attorney, that at some point in the future, the trust will distribute over remainder man or remainder man. And that's usually 60, 80, 100 years in the future. There are ways around that. One is called the Rockefeller's Clause. One is called the Royals Clause. When I first was working in the trust field in the late 1980s, we used King George V Royals Clause. And if you want to, I can recite it to you by heart. Those were situated in the Cook Islands, Isle of Man, Gibraltar, the Channel Islands, within the British Commonwealth. Or you can use citus. You can cite the trust in a place that has either extended period. There are some states and countries that say your trust may exist for a minimum of 80 years or 95 years. And it's my understanding that some states and the Pacific Island nation of Niue, N-I-U-E, has actually abolished the rule concerning perpetuities in its entirety. Interestingly enough. And finally, we have the irrevocable common law trust, the private trust. One of the secrets of North America's and beyond the wealthiest families, including supposedly the Rothschilds, used properly to circle back to the beginning. It can be as if the fairy, the good fairy, there's only good fairies around my presentation, has waved her magic wand over herself and your family and given you the gift of what? Perpetual wealth, perpetual prosperity. Interview. After the appropriate disclaimer, I'm a paralegal non-attorney, and now I'm very far I can up to, I've accomplished the following. I've told you this is part one of a four-part lecture series. This is Fundamental of the Trust Operation, Foundation and Principles. The next presentation, which is a completely separate presentation, otherwise I'd be here till 3 or 4 in the morning, is Fundamentals of Trust Operation Personnel. The third is Fundamental Trust Operation Procedures. And the last is Fundamentals of Trust Operation Resources and Trust Purpose. I then established that a trust for estate planning purposes, remember there are over 18 different types of trust in common use, and I mentioned several. The purpose of it is to maintain or even increase wealth. You're doing it for the family members and the perpetual generations. I gave you 3 families that are reasonably ascertained have done this. Rockefellers, the Romneys, and the Hunts. H.L. Hunt and his 3 sons. And I gave you some information about Lamar and his successes. Successful man. I then talked about its understanding about wealth, and I gave you the second gem. A trust, an irrevocable common law trust never dies because the contract is renewable every 20 or 25 years, depending on how concerned you are about the rule concerning perpetuities. I then talked about our website, www.passingbucks.com. I talked about the Art of Passing Bucks Volume 1. Everybody, green for growth, green for money. $49.95 plus tax plus shipping. However, if you get the discount code, good for the next 2 weeks. Actually, good for the next 2 weeks and a couple of days. Then I gave you suggestions you might consider the newsletter, which I contributed the occasional article to. And I talked about and established the value of the Art of Passing Buck Volume 2, Blue for Trust Blueprints. It's not a standalone book. It requires Volume 1. It refers back to it. Again, if you already have a volume 1 and want to purchase the limited copy, it's 60. Volume 2 is the Hindu numeral 60. Brought to the West by Arab traders, and then BOL 2. Or if we want the whole enchilada and the full Monty, 60 both. I'm talking about our Amazon affiliate program, and recommended 3 books from that. The Hughes books, and which talk about planning, long-term trust planning. And then I gave you Ferdinand Lundberg's book, The Rich and the Super Rich, still relevant today, 50 years after it was written. I talked about where court cases fit into the thing. It's a great start. It gets you 20%. And I talked about how to get to 50, 80, and 100. And finally, I talked about 4 types of trust used for estate planning. Mentioned there were 18 different types of trust in common use, including the Rockefeller Pet Trust. I talked about the living trust, the baseline that many of you are familiar with. And I talked about the revocable trust, which is especially used in California regarding real estate due to Proposition 13 and everything related with that. And I talked about the irrevocable statutory trust, which can actually increase wealth over time if one is mindful about the rules of certain perpetuities. And finally, I gave you the gold standard, the irrevocable common law trust, the private trust, one of the secrets of North America's and beyond the wealthiest families. To put a bow on this, I circle back to my fairy. She's a good fairy, used properly, as Gwen Weinhoff demonstrated in her mini seminar down in Diners, which you can see on our website, www.passingbucks.com, a little over 5 years ago. Used properly, one of yourself and your family, giving you the gift of what? Perpetual wealth. I thank you for your attention to this matter. I return the whole meeting to the presiding officer for the purposes of the question and answer period.
We'll open the floor to questions.
This is for the general people interested in estate planning.
I have a question, Howard. So I have a trust. I can't remember now if it's a revocable or irrevocable one. But so is it all? But I don't have a will. Should I get one? Is that good to have as part of a trust or?
Okay. Speaking as a paralegal,
right.
The attorney is Bob Lewis, but he's not here.
Yeah.
I think he would agree with me. A trust normally comes with what's called a pour-over will.
Mm-hmm.
A pour-over will says it is used for 2 purposes. First, you make specific requests that are not going to go into the trust. Say you have a niece and you're going to give her a piece of jewelry that she admired. It's used for that purpose. It also says everything else will go into the trust. That's why it's called a pour-over will. That's what a will is. Yes, if you handle trust using for estate planning, speaking as paralegal, not attorney's best to have a will.
So, okay, so I put some stuff in the trust that I probably could have kept out in the will. Like, I put, like, old comics and things of that nature. That probably would have been best in the trust versus the will. I mean, in the will versus the trust.
And you would do, again, speaking as paralegal, a codicil. If you have a person, like a niece or nephew, you want to give those comics to, do a codicil saying, I've decided that my nephew Jake will get this comic book or this comic book collection, something like that. Again, that's used to keep things out of the trust that don't actually belong in the trust you want to bequeath to somebody.
Okay, so that's probably a bad thing. But so we don't have a trust yet, and so I want to venture into we have to create one. So we have 3 401k plans, 4 different life insurances, and hubby started doing the Bitcoin thing. But just playing with a couple. But eventually we're gonna soon start investing in stocks. What kind of trusts should we be looking at? Does it depend on your beneficiaries, or I'm totally green on it. Maybe he's already thought of it, but I mean.
Some investments cannot be held in your own trust. They're actually already in a trust.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm totally agreeing about this.
And some you can't have a trust that's holding. You basically want to get with your financial advisor and say, what is the best? First of all, you go, what's my end game? In other words, are you looking to provide for children, nieces, nephews, pets?
Maybe in my pets.
And then you want to have the Rockefeller Pet Trust.
I love my cats.
Yeah.
Okay. You actually, everybody's in this age, except maybe some of the folks in the back, that they ought to be. If you have assets, and you're getting to be 40, 50, you want to be thinking, what happens if the Apaches kidnap me? Think about it. One never knows. The Apaches might kidnap you. What happens then? Did I answer the question satisfactorily?
Yeah, it's just how do I get started? You know, my husband just got stopped.
Financial planner.
Yeah, I know.
What
I gotta read.
Okay.
Getting a
And-
financial
or at
planner.
least take a financial planning class. Do something.
Okay.
Know something that makes the
Yeah, to understand what you're doing, and you want to have a long-term goal.
Yeah, this has been good because my experience with trust was back in 2012. And I told my wife I was going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And she said, not without a will, you're not. And I said, I wish you had a little more confidence in my climbing ability, but okay. So what we did was we brought in a lawyer and sat down and I gathered all of our assets, tried to get up, a handle on everything we had. And then he said, and I believe we have a living trust, which is also a will. But I'll tell you what happened. That week, I went off climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, it went into a file, and I haven't looked at it since. So this has motivated me to go to the file and drag it out and take a look at it again.
I think that's
I
what I
would
have.
suggest
A living
that
trust.
you review your financial situation at least once a year. You sit down, I don't know if you want to do that at the beginning of the year or the end of the last year. You sit there and go, what has changed? And definitely, again, speaking as parallel on 30, if you get married, you have a marriage in, you have children, you have a pet, you move,
Yeah.
you basically, yes.
We have to hear about the Rockefeller dog.
Okay. This is a famous, this is supposedly a true story from the estate planning. My predecessor, Blake Frango's, that quotes it, although not by this name. Supposedly the Rockefellers are on vacation, and they out walking the dog, and somebody gets roughhousing with the dog, and the dog bites them. They offer to pay the medical bills, whatever. The guy's adamant. Sues them. Guess what he gets?
The dog.
The dog that bit him. It's the only thing in the trust.
Wow.
Now, that's supposedly a true story. I've loaded it. That's the famous Rockefeller dog. You want, and Gwen Wyckoff talks about this, every liability producing item is its own separate trust. Remember Jerry Buss later in the Lakers? You know his doctor was in chemical engineering? You know how he made his money? He made his money in commercial real estate in Phoenix. Every one of his buildings was in a separate corporation. That means that it couldn't be taken, if you lose one building, there's not a daisy chain, it doesn't lose all his assets.
Oh.
Again, it's basic, speaking as a paralegal attorney, every one is in a different trust. It's the liability producing item. In other words, every car is a different trust. Supposedly the one that Teddy Kennedy had a little incident chapter later, that's supposedly was its own separate trust. When I'm told this, I've been told this by trust experts, when the Kopechne family thought about suing, they found that Ted Kennedy did not own a car, he didn't own any of his real estate, any of his offices, he didn't own any of his clothing, any of the furnishings. He had a few bits of clothing and a checking account with $1.98 in it. That's all he personally owned. He was essentially judgment proof because, remember, his father, Joseph B. Kennedy Sr., set up a series of trusts. back around in the late 1930s and the 1940s. More questions? Again, thank you. If you want to order tonight, I can order a book, or you can go, I can send you a PayPal invoice, or you can go and pay PayPal or Stripe. I have one more question.
Now, what is the blue book again?
The blue book is the Art of Passing the Buck, Volume 2. This is trust blueprints. This is most of the information to put together an irrevocable common law trust. If you want to do that type of trust, and this has things like how to transfer a life insurance policy, how to do a banking minute, how to do a board of trustees minute, etc. All these items are contained. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's been my pleasure. You now know what I do for a living.
Yay!